Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to C4C Apologetics. I'm your host, Danny. You guys probably already know that.
Nope, never heard of you before. Who are you? Googled it and found this. C4C stands for Contending for Christ. It's a ministry of Open Door Baptist Church. Click on the link for the YouTube channel and it takes me here. Okay, he's a Calvinist. You know what that means. It's time for breakfast. I eat Calvinists for breakfast. Hmm, let's have a chat. And a Calvinist. Hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining me, and especially to my patrons and channel members. 405 more subscribers are what I need to make my 5,000 goal. If you aren't subscribed, please, thank you.
I got Dr. Paul Miles with us again. And today I've asked him to come on because he's been talking a lot about archaeology. I want to go ahead and talk a little bit about that, his studies, his research, and what it points to as far as historical narratives of the Bible is concerned.
So, Dr. Miles is an archaeologist?
So my wife and I live in Kiev, Ukraine. We're currently displaced to Oklahoma due to the situation out there. We started Grace Abroad Ministries in 2016 to do translation, teaching, and outreach. It's grown to go beyond translation into teaching and outreach. A lot of our work is done in foreign languages. And then we got to thinking we should probably do something in English. So that's where the Thursday show comes in. We also started the International Society for Biblical Hermeneutics.
Note how Dr. Miles never mentioned any study in archaeology. I checked his academic credentials. Here they are. Nothing in history or archaeology. Here's his webpage on his work. He lists work in hermeneutics, apologetics, soteriology, Christian life, and various tangents. Scrolling through the tangents, not a single one is in history or archaeology. I have no problem with considering the views of amateurs, but shouldn't the amateur be able to at least point to something that they have done in this field? I feel like we're getting Joe Schmo's opinion on archaeology here. So, what's Joe's opinion on how archaeology confirms the biblical narrative?
People disbelieve that Pontius Pilate was an actual person in history until they found some artifacts that had his name inscribed on it.
This is quite the straw man. This site is a forum, but the author of the post has a bibliography to support his conclusion here. Further, Bart Ehrman lists evidence for Pilate in Josephus, Tacitus, Philo, on coins, as well as from the inscription discovered in 1961, which is likely the discovery our guests are referring to here. But this wasn't a discovery that changed people's minds about the existence of Pilate. Evidence for Pilate's existence abounded long before this discovery.
There is no God, for example, so people just kind of evolved into what we have today. And then we have some serious archaeological conflicts with that. For example, the pyramids, right?
Yeah.
So you're telling me that people were these hominids that just kind of lived out there and finally learned how to babble and talk, and then boom, all of a sudden they make giant pyramids that we don't have the technology to create today.
This is probably the weirdest claim in support for young Earth I have ever heard. We are hominids. If Paul doesn't think that hominids made the pyramids, where does he think they came from? Aliens? Or did God make them? He seems to confuse young Earth and old Earth by claiming Homo sapiens were still a new species when the pyramids were built.
Right. Yeah.
No, not much of an intermediate.
Only if you are a young Earther. For those of us who live in reality, Homo sapiens have been around for about 200,000 years before the pyramids were built. Plenty of time to learn and develop. As for the technology aspect, we don't currently have the technology for Greek fire either. Where does he think that came from? Prometheus? I'm wondering how someone with this level of critical thinking skills managed to get a PhD in anything. Unfortunately, he never does say where he thinks the pyramids came from.
Are you an Apple or a Windows guy? PC.
Windows.
Oh, good, because Apple is a communist system that has they're opening out front with them being, if you will, evil because they have the fallen fruit as their they're very, very open and outspoken with that. And so I'm
The big old
surprised
binary.
I'm surprised a lot of Christians use Apple.
Sorry, didn't realize we would need one of these when I started this project. I thought I was reviewing serious scholarship. After the first 5 minutes, I thought it was serious amateurs. But no, we have stooped to tin hat level conspiracy theory.
This
Mhm.
it starts to get real controversial. A lot of
Yeah.
people trying to define, okay, this is the Pharaoh of the Exodus. This is the Pharaoh of Joseph.
Right.
I still haven't figured out which Pharaoh of Joseph or the Exodus I land on myself.
Yeah.
Interesting, likely because if you study Egyptian history, you see that the Exodus story doesn't fit. If you pick the earlier date many biblical scholars use, around 1400 BCE, you run into problems with the archaeological evidence showing that Canaan was firmly ruled by Egypt at this time, as evidenced by the Amarna letters. You also have the problem with the Hebrews building Pithom and Pi-Ramses, a city named for Ramses II, who won't be born for another 200 years. If you go with the later date, 1250 BCE, now you have Ramses in power, but the problems are compounded for Joshua and crew as Jericho, Ai, Arad, Heshbon, Dibon, Lachish, and Hazor, all cities the Israelites allegedly conquered either before or after crossing the Jordan in their conquest of Canaan, not a single one existed at this time. Most have been destroyed centuries earlier, others were yet to be built. What's a biblical archaeologist to do? Worse yet is the people problem. This problem exists regardless of which date you pick for the Exodus. The Bible is clear there were 600,000 fighting men that left with the Hebrews in the Exodus, in addition to women and children, a number reiterated 4 times in the Bible. This would put the total number of Hebrews leaving Egypt at 2.5 to 3 million people, more than the estimated population of the entire country at the time. Funny how people who love biblical archaeology love to point out tidbits that could support their narrative, while ignoring the massive problems in lining up their narrative with so many other archaeological finds.
The questions from what he drew out are the wrong questions to be asked. And looking at, okay, shifting not the Bible timeline to see everything fit, but shifting the Egyptian timeline.
Bingo.
And then when you do that, everything lines up.
So, if we assume the Bible is right and Egyptian historians have no idea what they are talking about, we can make the Bible fit. Because, of course, when the data points don't agree with the Bible is right and the data is wrong.
One of their big arguments is that no Christian Egyptologist holds to that perspective.
If you study the history of Egypt, it's impossible to make the Bible fit. But by all means, if you need to change Egyptian history to make the Bible true, what difference does it make if we move historic events to fit your claims? After all, truth doesn't matter, only God, right?
But even then, a lot of the secularists are trying to build a timeline which is based on evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Says that people would have lived in Egypt for long before we believe the flood occurred, right?
Mm-hmm.
And their archaeological evidence for that, I think, is frankly lacking.
Right.
Have you ever considered any of it? Since he doesn't present what he considers to be poor evidence, it's impossible to address his claim. I'm wondering if he thinks there were never any people in Egypt before the flood. Obviously, he doesn't agree with the dating of what he would consider pre Earth artifacts, but we have Egyptian writing that dates to between 3320 and 3150 BCE, a pre flood era. According to these guys, that would be just 700 years after creation. Adam and Eve would still be alive. Methuselah, the grandfather of Noah, would be born in this period. Funny how the people living in Egypt didn't seem to notice this alleged flood. They keep building pyramids, even though most believers say that they died in the flood. But that's right. Paul here did say the pyramids weren't built by hominids. Still wondering who he thinks built the pyramids.
If you want to break it, like Rashi and the rabbis did. In the centuries when they wrote, they were able to lead people astray and say, look, this Yeshua did not come 69 weeks after the
decree,
the timeline like the Christians say it is, because they made like 200 years disappear. Now we've got all sorts of archaeology and stuff disproving the rabbis to prove the Jesus timeline. Oh, it's
Right.
great. I love it all, man. It's
And
wild.
And again, all we get is unsupported claims. We have all kinds of evidence, but you present none of it. For all the support you give your claims, you could have just said, "We have the archaeological evidence, trust us," left it at that and gone home.
and stuff like that's found in the Talmud, right?
So I think it's, oh goodness, it's Midrash Olam. Oh, I could probably look it up for you.
But I saw a post you had made.
Rashi's a big one.
That's as close as we get to a source. Looks like he's referring to a Middle Ages Jewish scholar who wrote a commentary on Daniel. He might be referring to the Dead Sea Scrolls as the evidence refuting Rashi, but I really can't tell. He's too vague to fact check.
Was there a discussion as far as the frogs of the plagues, and that there was an argument whether it was a bunch of little frogs or one giant frog during the plagues in Egypt? Is that what they were arguing?
It's always interesting to look at people present their case and everything. Sometimes it's funny though. So in the Egyptian plagues, we have the plague of the frogs. And the first time that the word frog occurs, the frog comes out and it's in the singular. From there, it starts being spoken of in the plural. So I believe it was Rabbi Akiva who said, you see there, it was one frog that came as a terror to Egypt. The other rabbis just completely disagreed. Now, I agree with the other rabbis that the first use of the frog is like the class, the frog came. And then we see the frogs plural after that. I don't want that to be true, though. I want it to be true that there was one giant Godzilla-looking frog coming out there and terrorizing these oppressors of Israel. That's what I want to be true.
Yeah.
But we can't allow what we want to be true to dictate our Bible interpretation. I'm sorry.
Why not, indeed? Since what you want to be true dictates how you view history, and whenever history becomes inconvenient for you, you just chuck it. Why not interpret the Bible however you want it to read? This would solve your problem with the pyramids, too. Hominids didn't build the pyramids, the giant frog did it.
Bible critics just absolutely making something up and being disproven. All right, I gotta pull up some slides on this one here.
Excellent. Now this ties back to what's known as the Maccabean theory, and the Maccabean theory is the fact that people will argue that the book of Daniel was written during the Maccabean period of the 1st, 2nd century BC. There's so much historically accurate information in it that they claim Daniel could not have written it in the 6th century BC. Why are you bringing this up?
Daniel is very inconvenient for the critics.
I like that word, inconvenient.
Belshazzar brought out the instruments from the temple and was having a big old feast, being debaucherous. Then the hand shows up, writes on the wall, and said, "That's it, Belshazzar, you're done for." And then he dies that night, and Darius the Mede takes over. Here we have a commentary written by Kaiser von Lingerke.
Das Buch Daniel.
So in the 1800s, especially in Germany, it had become really popular to attack the Word of God. But the hand in the writing, there is no historical basis whatever on which such an account can rest. The writing's on the wall. Belshazzar says, "Who can explain this?" Daniel comes in, explains it, and Belshazzar makes him the third in the kingdom. In Herodotus's writings, he is an ancient Greek historian who doesn't talk about Belshazzar. So he says, last king was Nabonid, not Belshazzar. The writer has given us a mere figment instead of a real name. The whole story is disfigured and falsified by the author, who is neither an eyewitness of the occurrences nor accurately acquainted with the history of them. So then they found the Nabonidus cylinder from Ur. That's a picture of the cylinder. That's a picture of Ur.
Look at you.
2005.
Is that you?
Yeah, that's me right there. It mentions Belshazzar by name, right? The thought was that there was no Belshazzar. The
Mhm.
name doesn't occur in Herodotus.
Mm.
And then we see in this text, it mentions Belshazzar, my oldest son, my offspring.
They really had to scrape the bottom of the barrel to find this one. Not only had I never heard of Caesar von Lengerke, when I Googled him, all I could find was places that you could still get his books and a brief bio on Wikipedia. Was he ever a serious critical scholar? It's hard to tell, but not likely as there is so little about him. But when I Googled Caesar von Lengerke Belteshazzar, the first thing to pop up is from Creation Ministries. Now we know the source of their material. They cite two German theologians, von Lengerke and Ferdinand Hitzig, the co-authors of the book they mentioned, Das Buch Daniel. So one source, one commentary in the 1850s, made this claim. An odd claim to make when Belteshazzar is also documented in Xenophon's Cryopedia, according to Encyclopedia Britannica. Xenophon was a Greek historian who lived about 430 to 350 BCE. Numerous works of his survive today and give us insight into ancient Greek history. And yes, the Nabonidus cylinders did confirm Belteshazzar was a real person, but was this ever seriously in doubt? Every site I saw that claims skeptics said this all cite these two men, except this one, which gives no support for its claim at all. However, the dating of the book of Daniel is a serious question among biblical scholars. Whether the book was written by Daniel or even in the 6th century BCE is disputed, the majority opinion being that chapters 7 through 12 date to the middle of the 2nd century BCE and chapters 2 through 6 a few centuries earlier. The reasoning isn't as these two claim, but rather it's based on language and history. In the canonical version, chapters 1 and 8 through 12 are written in Hebrew, while 2:4 through 7:28 are written in Aramaic. Some parts of the non-canonical portion, which are included in the Catholic Bible, were written in Greek. The form of Aramaic used is later than that which is in the book of Ezra, which dates to the 5th century BCE. The form is earlier than that which is used in the Qumran texts, 2nd century BCE, but not significantly so. Thus, the range puts it closer to the 2nd century. Our interlocutor's claims that the prophecies being true as a part of the reason for rejecting an earlier date for the chapters of Daniel has a grain of truth to it. The prophecies are strikingly accurate until they aren't. The literary technique of prophecy after the fact was common during the Hellenistic period. Thus, the point at which the prophecies no longer accurately portray the historic evidence gives us a likely date for the book, specifically the end of Antiochus IV's life. What's more telling of the scholarship of these two is they bring up skeptic doubt of Belteshazzar, a person no serious scholar ever doubted the existence of, but never mention the issues with Darius the Mede. It is with Darius that one of the serious flaws of this book's historicity are exposed. Daniel claims Darius the Mede took over Babylon the night Belteshazzar was slain, but Herodotus lists the last two kings of the Medes as Cyaxares and Astyages, as do the Babylonian chronicles. In the mid-1540s BCE, Cyrus defeats the Lydians and makes his way to Babylon. Despite having plenty of evidence for the kings of the Medes and multiple historical accounts of the defeat of Babylon, none of them mention a Darius as being a Mede king. For more historical issues with the accuracy of Daniel, see The Atheist Guide to the Old Testament, Volume 1 by Dr. Joshua Bowen.
Some of the things that Daniel writes about, because even like in Belshazzar's account in chapter 5, it talks about he wrote on the plaster of the wall. Only somebody familiar with the inner workings of the room itself knew how the room was constructed. And when it was destroyed, it wasn't known until after it was discovered what the room was actually like.
No one knew what the room was like, how it was constructed until it was destroyed? Dude, where are you getting this from? Plaster walls were common then. It's a pretty good guess that the walls were plaster. But what is your source for the claims that the walls were really plaster? I can write a story about finding a unicorn in a concrete building, but that isn't evidence that I was really there and my story is true just because I claim that the building that I found the unicorn in was made of concrete. If you found the actual building that I claim to have found the unicorn in, and it really was made of concrete, that would not be evidence that there was ever a unicorn in the building. What would be evidence of your story would be finding the actual writing on the wall. Sadly, everything this God writes always manages to get destroyed.
Yeah.
They were just I'm sorry, they were stupid. They were trying to disprove the Bible, and that's the wrong thing to do.
Which again shows the level of scholarship of this video. I have to admit, though, that I too have made this error at times and still sometimes do. Looking for data to support a point instead of looking at the data on a point and then drawing a conclusion from the data.
Let God be true and every man be a liar. And so when you go out to discredit it, you're going to be proven one way or the other wrong.
Not really. The flood demonstrably didn't happen. See all of geology, biology, and history of the period if you need proof, or some of my videos on this topic.
What would you say are the top 5 most powerful discoveries within archaeology that you're aware of that supports, corroborates, or proves the biblical narrative? If you had to list 5, what would they be briefly and why?
Top 1, in my opinion, is the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Okay.
Discovered in 1946, the Hebrew Old Testament, that prove that the Old Testament had been preserved all the way up through the oldest copies that we had at the time, which were centuries younger than these.
Again, some truth to this claim. The Dead Sea Scrolls are the oldest copies of much of the Old Testament that we have today. For the most part, they do confirm copies that we had before the scrolls are generally faithful to these copies now found. But if they don't reflect actual historical events, it really doesn't matter if the stories were copied accurately. Moreover, there were 4 versions of the text found among the scrolls: the Masoretic, the Septuagint, the Samaritan, which included only the first 5 books, plus a 4th group of texts unique to the Dead Sea community. It's clear that there was no one accepted biblical canon. Eugene Ulrich, professor of Hebrew at University of Notre Dame, suggests that there may have been 2 biblical traditions arising independently of one another, instead of one being a revision or a corruption of the other. Then which one are you going to call the Word of God?
This is the Ketef Hinnom scrolls, the silver scrolls. These were discovered in the later 20th century, right?
Okay.
So these are little silver scrolls, and they discovered them. They're about the size of cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
And they went through the difficult work of unrolling them and revealed this, a priestly blessing, Leviticus numbers somewhere in there.
Mm-hmm.
So these are copies of the Old Testament, or fragments of the Old Testament, which are older than the Old Testament.
If these writings predate the Old Testament and contain portions of the Old Testament, would that not be evidence that the Old Testament writers copied them, and your Bible isn't the word of your God? He just copied the works of humans? These scrolls, written on silver and designed to be worn as an amulet, date to the 6th century, approximately. The inscriptions are from the Book of Numbers, which likely were written within the century before these scrolls were made. Impressive.
This one has David's name written on it. Actually, it says the House of David. This came up in 1993. People were trying to doubt that King David existed, which is an absurd thing to doubt, but okay.
Trying to doubt. I have no idea how one would do that. Almost there. Trying. There! I doubt that David ever existed. This is the best one he has presented so far, though. Scholars did doubt, and continue to doubt, there really was a King David. This stele is evidence there could have been a King David. However, the inscription describes kings that were conquered and mentions the House of David. Who was king of Israel at the time is unreadable. Does it say David was king? We don't know. Personally, I do think there was a King David, but not the great king portrayed in the Bible.
This is number 4 on my list. Crucified man at Givat Hamivdar. People have tried to say that crucifixion wasn't a thing. And obviously, we have all sorts of texts that talk about crucifixion, the Bible being the most significant of them.
Yeah.
But since that's the one that people are trying to attack,
Did anyone ever doubt that the Romans crucified people? That is well documented. There were questions about how it was done or how it worked, but not whether or not it was done. I've already covered this one in barely any evidence. Most interesting thing about this one is the feet are turned to the side to drive the nail through the heel bone, which makes it very unlikely that 3 nails were used and that the feet were nailed together. They more likely were nailed separately, as is depicted here.
this is the seal of Nathan Melech, who is mentioned in 2 Samuel 23:11.
Mm.
And he took away the horses that the kings of Judah had given the son in the entrance of the house of Jehovah by the chamber of Nathan Melech and the chamberlain, who was the priest, and he burned the chariots of the sun with fire. Not someone that you would have known about if you were making up this story several years later. But they found his seal. So that is the seal that's got his name right there on it.
Guys, you are embarrassing yourselves. If you want to claim your sources are backing your points, you might want to at least check your sources. Your slide attributes that verse to 2 Samuel 23:11, and you reiterate the error. This is 2 Samuel 23:11, not even close. Further, Nathan in 2 Samuel was an important figure. He crowned David and was one of David's closest advisors. The verse you wanted was 2 Kings 23:11. Do you guys even know your own Bible?
All
So
right,
far, we stuck to like human stuff, right?
Mhm.
You start talking about the flood. That's another archaeological thing in and of itself. It's geological, right?
Yeah.
That's an occasion where God did something to the earth, and He's left all sorts of evidence behind, right? All these rock layers that were put out there.
Please tell me how rock layers can be formed in a flood. For more on that one, see the live stream I did just this last week with geologist Stephen Bowman.
Noah's Ark. Is that in Turkey?
Oh, brother. Noah's Ark is the weakest link in the Bible.
You are the weakest link. Goodbye.
It's what broke biblical inerrancy for me and ultimately destroyed my faith. Let me guess. The giant frog built the boat, too.
I don't believe it is.
Why?
So
Everybody else says it is.
Everybody? Not even Answers in Genesis thinks it is. And no one wants to find that boat and vindicate themselves more than Answers in Genesis. But sadly, the claims of findings of Noah's Ark are admittedly bogus, even for most believers.
Is it possible that we have lost the ark, though? I think that it's more likely that we have entirely lost the ark than that we are ever going to find it.
So everybody doesn't even include your friend here.
If you do find the ark, Noah's ark, the Ark of the Covenant, if you
Mhm.
find what is it, the Holy Grail that caught the blood,
Right.
or which by
The
the way
cup,
is fictional. That's not a thing, right?
Wait, the Holy Grail is fiction? I mean, this version,
Behold, Arthur, this is the Holy Grail.
as is the Holy Hand Grenade.
We have the holy hand grenade. Yes, of course. The holy hand grenade of Antioch.
But the Holy Grail is supposed to be the cup that Jesus used at the Last Supper. Is this guy saying that there was no Last Supper? If so, what is communion supposed to be based on? More likely, he's saying the cup Jesus used wasn't holy, but if the cup was found and it really was a thing and it proved to be real, would you not consider it a holy object considering the purpose that it served? I bet you'd be clamoring to go see it if it existed.
Of the 5 places that have been proposed, the one in Turkey was proposed by a fake biblical archaeologist that I want to put out a warning about.
Okay.
Ron Wyatt has told people that he has found the Ark of the Covenant. Not that he like found it digging around in the dirt, but that he was walking along and God spoke to him and said, the Ark of the Covenant is behind that rock over there. And he looked, and lo and behold, the Ark of the Covenant with blood on top of the mercy seat. And he says that he took a sample of the blood and did a test on the blood. And by the way, he won't show this Ark of the Covenant to anyone, which is suspicious. He took a blood sample that only had 24 chromosomes instead of 46 chromosomes.
Is this supposed to be Jesus' blood? And Jesus had 24 chromosomes? If so, he wouldn't have a human body. But Jesus never touched the ark. The ark was lost when the Philistines conquered Jerusalem in 586 BCE. Is this supposed to be animal blood? I looked for a website that listed the number of chromosomes that various organisms have. Not an exhaustive list by any means, but the only thing on the list that had 24 chromosomes were snails and rice. And since rice doesn't have any blood, is he trying to prove that the Israelites sacrificed snails?
So these are his words. He says, all of us have 46 chromosomes, unless we have Down syndrome, which would mean that you would have 45.
Paul once again displays gross ignorance on the subject matter. Down syndrome is trisomy 21, meaning a person with Down syndrome has an extra chromosome 21. They are not lacking this chromosome. The author he quotes also doesn't seem to realize that there are a myriad of genetic disorders that leave a person shy one or with an extra chromosome or two, not just trisomy 21. Besides trisomy 21, the major chromosomal aneuploidies seen in live-born babies are trisomy 18, trisomy 13, and with 45 chromosomes, Turner syndrome, a single X sex chromosome, and with 47, XXY, Klinefelter syndrome, XYY, and XXX. A simple Google search would help you out here.
If you lose one chromosome, you end up with Down syndrome.
Okay.
If you lose more, you're dead.
Again, not true. Rob homozygotes is very rare, but here is a report of a family with 3 adults with this syndrome. Check your facts, dude. When you keep making false statements like this that are really easy to fact check, you call into question the veracity of any of your Bible claims. When your scholarship in this area is so obviously poor, how can we trust your archaeology scholarship or biblical scholarship is any better? Since you gave the wrong reference for a verse you quoted, taking it right off your source, you demonstrate to us that you just trust your sources without verifying them.
Now, he took a test of this blood sample and said that it has 24 chromosomes. So he says Christ had 24 chromosomes. Each parent supplies 23 chromosomes to a new infant. So Christ got 23 from his mother. He got 1 from his father, God the Father, which was a Y, which made him a male.
You said a minute ago that a person can't live with 44 chromosomes, and now you claim that Jesus lived with 24. Which is it? A person can or cannot live like this. Next, how does God have any chromosomes? They are supposed to be physical things. He's supposed to be a spirit. Next, if God really does have chromosomes, why would he only give Jesus 1? Why not 23? I know you needed to get him a Y chromosome so he could be male, but this is quite the convoluted story.
He got it not from an earthly father, or else he would have had 46 like the rest of us. Okay, so what are the implications here? First of all, that Jesus only had 23. Did I get that right? 24. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you get 23 from your mother, 23 from your father. He didn't have an earthly father, but he was a male, which is from the father line. So God the Father gave him the 24th. Okay. This is a denial of the full humanity of Christ. Not only is it fake archaeology, a flat out lie. He did not find the Ark of the Covenant, but now he is lying and saying that Christ was not fully human. That is heresy.
That's his biggest problem with the story? That Jesus gets a chromosome from God so he's not fully human? How do you solve the chromosome problem? Jesus had 23 and was the only male to live with no Y chromosome? Jesus had 2 sets from Mary and just had XX chromosomes but identified as male? God made him a special set of human chromosomes? They would still be from God, though, so it doesn't leave you with the heresy problem? Adam got his chromosomes from God and was human, as did Eve, but that isn't heresy. So many problems when you try to reconcile genetics with the Bible.
Blatant heresy that he's using fake archaeology to support. That's not to say that he's always wrong about everything, but whenever he makes another fantastic claim, like I found the Ark of Noah, I think, yeah, I heard what you said about the Ark of the Covenant too. So be careful of the guy saying he found it in Turkey.
Exactly. And since you, Paul, made a number of factually incorrect claims here, we can take the rest of what you have to say with a great deal of skepticism, especially the ridiculous claim that humans didn't build the pyramids. My bowl is empty now, so I guess we are done. Live your life.
For example, the pyramids, right?
Yeah.
So you're telling me that people were these hominids that just kind of lived out there and finally learned how to babble and talk, and then boom, all of a sudden they make giant pyramids that we don't have the technology to create today.